Welcome to the Richard Dolan Show, where every week we fight the good fight. Greetings. I'm very pleased to have a guest and a friend here with me on this particular program, and that is Francisco Mourao Correa. I think I pronounced your name closely, Francisco, from Portugal. How are you?
You did. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to talk to you again. It's been some time.
We met in 2012 in Copenhagen, and really enjoyed meeting you there. You're one of the leaders of Portugal Exopolitics, or Exopolitics Portugal.
Exactly. We did met in 2012. I was one of the speakers. That was an event, a conference organized by Exopolitics Denmark.
Yes,
and it was me, you, Robert Fleischer from Exopolitics Germany, and Hakan Blomqvist from Sweden.
Yeah, it was wonderful. Actually, that was
it was very, very nice. And then you came to Portugal 2 years after, 2 or 3 years after, for a couple of lectures, and it was amazing. It was very, very nice.
I had my longest hair ever for that trip. That was my Einstein period in terms of my hair, and we did some great lectures, meeting with other researchers, and you took me around to Porto and to Lisbon, and it was really wonderful.
And unfortunately, we did not have time to go to Fatima.
No, but hopefully, maybe at some point we'll get a chance to chat about that. But yes, I really wanted to talk with you for a number of reasons. We haven't caught up in a while, but also I've been trying in the last year to speak with as many researchers of UFOs from around the world. It occurred to me, and this is more of an American problem probably than a European problem, but I find that American UFO research doesn't really have as much of a global focus on the phenomenon as it ought to. And I was feeling that I myself, I felt really not up to speed on a lot of the developments in terms of global ufology. And I thought, well, why not simply talk to people from around the world, get an idea about what their research is like, what it's like to be doing UFO research in different parts of the world, what are the big issues and so forth. And I think you're a great one to talk to about what's happening in Portugal.
Well, thank you. Well, I believe that the US has so many cases and good cases that, you can be entertained just with you.
No, it's true.
It's understandable. But the UFO is not only for the US, it's across the globe, around the globe, and in Portugal too. Mm-hmm. And in Portugal, although we are a small country compared to the US and to other countries, it's interesting to see how the secrecy has not been secret. Because the big military cases are public right now. There was no secrecy. There was no. It's interesting to and that was something that always fascinated me, is that Portugal has 2 NATO bases. Just recently, it had a U.S. base, strategic U.S. base in the Azores, and there's supposedly some conspiracy theory that maybe the CIA was involved in the coup in '74 and the assassination of a prime minister in 1980, and even though and after World War II, several politicians, monarchs across Europe flew to Portugal to hide, and they were accommodated here, especially in Lisbon, Estoril. So many important people that were here. Of course, all the intelligence agencies were here as well. And even so, it was possible in 1980 for the actual then Chief of Staff of the Air Force to promote a protocol of cooperation between the Air Force, the Portuguese Air Force, and a group of civilian researchers that allowed the civilian researchers to go to the bases and interview the pilots. And that's something absolutely unique for the time, and even today. I mean, I guess in Brazil they tried to do something back in 2013, 14, something like that, but it was 1980, and so and all the documents were released, etc. So I find it fascinating. Is it because we are too small to make a difference?
I wonder. It is. I mean, people really should understand. Portugal has a history of shocking openness about many of its UFO encounters. And you and you're rather well connected in your country. It's obvious, and you arranged a meeting, a lunch that you and I had with the former chief of staff of the Portuguese Air Force, and that is General Tomás Conceição Silva.
Yeah.
I think I get one of his names right. He was a very, very fascinating man and told us some incredible Portuguese UFO stories. This man is a general and former chief of staff, intimately connected with Nato, and had a number of UFO stories. He's very open about it through the 1960s and 70s when he was active and working.
It's incredible how the former before him, the chief of staff of the Air Force, José Lemos Ferreira, also a general, very interested in the UFO phenomena as well, and he was the one who allowed this cooperation. And he from chief of staff of the Air Force, he became a joint chief of staff, like above him only the president.
Wow.
Yeah, and he would talk about UFO. Well, he's reserved as a person, but he was recorded for a documentary talking about UFOs. So
it's really interesting that this is the case. I mean, Portugal is a small country. I think your population is something like 13, 14 million, or
less than that.
Less.
10 million.
10 million. I was trying to be generous, Francisco. So it's a small country. It's on the edge of Europe, so maybe that's part of the reason. But it's really shocking. I mean, it is a NATO country, and yet there's this seeming very, very open attitude about it. How is the media in Portugal, though, regarding UFOs? Is it pretty much the same as the rest of the world?
Yeah, they don't care. They don't care. They don't care, really. Every time we do a conference or some kind of event, we sent lots of press releases, and there's no interest from mainstream media.
Right.
I mean, I was approached. We did a series for the National Geographic, which was called UFO Europe, and I coordinated all the filming here in Portugal in terms of choosing the people that will talk about it, choose the places to film, etc. And I think it's 6 or 7 episodes, and Portugal is the most well represented in terms of cases and in terms of people talking about the cases. And we also did another one called Planet UFO, also for National Geographic. That was poor one. And did for the History Channel, Extraterrestres. We filmed 3 seasons in 2012, 13, and 15. And we were asked to do a 4th season, but there's lack of budget. The History Channel in the Iberian Peninsula, Portugal and Spain, has less money than the US, so it's a matter of budget. But those were the main. It's not mainstream; it's cable. But
there are enough Portuguese cases, but both just UFOs seen by ordinary people or dealt with by the Portuguese military, that are really quite extraordinary. You know these cases better than most people. I know of a few, though, and they're really quite amazing.
Well, we could start like in 19. The big one is Fatima, of course, in 1917. But you could start in 57. It was this Captain Lemos Ferreira who later became general and chief of staff of the Air Force, and then joint chief of staff of the armed forces. He was on a night training flight between Portugal and Spain, at 25,000 feet, clear sky. He and 3 other sergeants, I guess he was a captain back then. And when they had a clear sky, flying calmly. And when they turn around in Granada in Spain, they spotted a bright yellow orb on the front of their planes. And this initially they thought it could be it was not a weather balloon, of course. They tried to understand if it was some kind of light coming from the ground, but it kept going with the planes on the front of the planes, and it changed colors and it changed shape, dimensions as well, and they were very, very intrigued. And this took over about 40 minutes with the lights always on the front of the planes. And back in Portuguese territory, from inside this ball came 3 other smaller objects, and suddenly the object became and changed shape from a globe to like a bent finger,
Yes.
reddish light, and then this whole set of objects just gave the impression that they were projecting themselves against the airplanes, and so they had to do an emergency maneuver not to collide with the objects and not
I
to collide.
listened to you give this lecture. You described this case, and I for some reason I remember you talking about this, and it was one of the most incredible cases. It's 1957, and these objects came out of the original sphere of light.
Exactly.
Did you say that they circled around
They
it?
circled around it. Yes, exactly.
And then either all of them or some of them basically
The
approached
whole set,
plane
yes,
rapidly.
the whole set of objects just went directly against the planes,
Right.
and they had to land, to make an emergency landing.
Yeah.
They did a report which was signed not only by the 4 pilots but also by other pilots that witnessed all the radio communications, and then the Air Force itself made also a document testifying that they were credible pilots. They had hundreds of hour flights, and but they just couldn't explain what just had happened. And
No, it's an incredible thing. Like, I mean, you're going from was it Lisbon? They were going to Granada, which is the southern coast.
Yes, they started from Otta, which is near Lisbon. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So a lot of people can kind of visualize that probably, and it's on the edge of Europe. It's on the edge of Western Europe. And in 1957, who would have done that? I mean, it wouldn't. I can't imagine the United States playing a game with the Portuguese Air Force like that. It doesn't make any sense. The Soviets, the Russians, no, not at all. None of the conventional explanations would make sense for like what power would be behind creating this ball of light. It's like a Foo Fighter report from World War II, a little bit.
Yes.
It's reminiscent of it. But here we are. 1957 wasn't a million years ago. This is a modern era, very technological, very sophisticated. And as you said, the captain of that craft became chief of staff of the Portuguese Air Force. That's really an amazing story.
And the one that allowed this cooperation with civilian researchers, because they wanted to understand. Although there was always like this curiosity attitude, not aggressive attitude, not in terms of defense, but trying to understand exactly what it was. But it didn't pose a threat. This case, yes, in terms of security of the pilots, but not. There are not other.
I remembered asking General, you were there, General Conceição. Thank you. I remember wanting to ask, I did ask him about getting any pushback from American NATO High Command about his interest in UFOs. And I just wonder, can you talk about this? If Portugal's military is so openly interested in investigating UFOs, they're still ally with the United States.
Back then, there was this interest because people were different. Right now, no, not so. right now, although this protocol agreement was never denounced in terms of never was an official ending of this agreement. Yes. Right now, there's no sharing of information. We tried like in 2013 or 14, I guess, with the backing of the university. It was a document that was signed by me as the coordinator of Exopolitics Portugal. It was signed by the dean of the university, by Joaquim Fernandes, famous UFO researcher in Portugal, who was the head of the research department in the university, and then also by the proponents, which was this chief of staff, General Conceição Silva, General Lemos Ferreira, and several other academics, PhDs, people from different faculties or different universities across Portugal. So you had like 10 people signing the document asking for the Ministry of Defense to reopen this cooperation of investigation. And we were very, very near, and there was almost a clear indication, at least the response that we had, official response from the Air Force was, we won't do anything without the political permission from the Ministry of Defense. We are open to it, but we won't do anything without permission.
When you say reopening, are you talking about reopening
this cooperation of research, allowing researchers to
to access information,
and contact pilots, etc.
Okay.
Well, we had a good high contact in the Ministry of Defense, and we were almost there, but then government changed, and they didn't say no. They always said, we will see. They didn't say no, but we will see. And then the government changed, the party changed, and we have to take another few steps.
Yeah, they gave you what we call a soft no, which is the same thing as a no, because they don't give you a hard no, which is always annoying. So the easiest way to reject anyone is to say, well, we'll look into it. Of course. So they were, but that's interesting. So there's always a possibility that something can be reestablished, I suppose, but it was better.
Yes, in the near future, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, of course. I think the communication is open. We just need to be patient.
There is another case from. This is the one that stands out most to me personally. I remembered reading about it. It made the MUFON journal in the U.S. back in the 70s. Jose Francisco Rodriguez.
It's not the most fascinating.
To me, it is. You know why? It's almost like a scene out of a movie, because he's flying these aircraft near Lisbon, I suppose. I don't know. I can't remember exactly.
It was above a dam. So this pilot, José Francisco Rodrigues, who is still active in terms of flying for commercial airlines. He went for a training flight. There was bad weather, many clouds. So his area of training was diverted to another area above the dam of Castelo de Bode, and suddenly he was flying at 6,000 feet, I guess, and he spotted what he thought was the nose of a cargo airplane. So he contacted the tower to check for any traffic, because there was not supposed to be traffic there, and the tower said no traffic at all. So he made a maneuver to try and understand what was there, and suddenly he saw a disc-shaped object, dark, with some yellow windows, supposedly windows, about 15 meters wide, stood just in front of his airplane. He screamed because he was
not expecting to run.
Not expecting, exactly. So the guy from the tower heard his screaming, and then it stayed there for like 2-3 seconds, and it flew away. The moment the object flew away, he felt a huge vibration on his airplane. This plane just lost sustainability and fell. There were two people, shepherds in the ground, that saw his plane like falling like a dead leaf, and he was desperate, trying to get hold of the plane. Tried every maneuver he knew, and then he turned off the engine, turned the engine on again, almost colliding with the top of some trees, and regained control of the aircraft.
Yeah, that's an incredible account.
Yeah. He tried to get back to the base. He suddenly, from the references and the terrain, saw that the instruments were all upside down, and he eventually gets to the base. The plane, he in shock, total shock. There was a psychological evaluation, etc. His plane was locked. After a week, they made tests, and only his plane showed traces of radioactivity. Also, at the same time the sighting took place, there was a major failure of energy at the dam as well.
Oh, yeah, I forgot that. It's an amazing story. I mean, it's just such a dramatic case. The man nearly died. He nearly crashed his plane into the ground as a result of this encounter with this unknown craft that obviously looked like a flying saucer. It had effect on his.
We have his report, and his report where he made the drawing. The drawing is a disc shape with small windows, totally. And the Air Force testified that he was a good pilot, hundreds of hours of flight, but they could not explain what it was.
No, well, not conventionally, of course. It's obviously an object that approached his plane that disrupted the capability of him to fly it, and he nearly died. But God forbid that someone try actually to explain it for what it appears to be. So that's awesome. But that's an amazing.
And I think Leslie Kane interviewed him, I guess, for his book as well, about this case.
Oh, you mean for her book, Pilots?
For her book, Pilots, Government
Officials Speak Out.
But the one of the cases that I think there are two other cases that are clearly great. One in '59 with General Conceição Silva.
Is this an angel hair case?
Exactly.
Yeah, I would love to hear about this.
This one, it is. Back then, he was a captain as well.
Mm-hmm.
He very early in the morning, he was preparing for a flight. He was waiting for orders to go with his colleagues, and then suddenly he saw what he calls like spider webs falling from the sky, something that he could collect with his hands, but it would dissolve immediately with maybe the warmth of the hands. So he found it interesting, but he could not explain it, and he forgot about it. Later on the same day, almost 100 kilometers to the south in Évora, like it was midday, and there was this gentleman who was the director of a school in Évora, commercial and industrial school in Évora. He was a man of science. He liked to promote astronomical observation with the population, etc. And suddenly he was giving classes, and some students came banging on his door to call him for some strange phenomena that was happening in the sky. So he ran to the schoolyard, and he spotted some sort of light, a small UFO up in the sky. So the students saw it. He saw it, of course, and other colleagues and the staff from the school saw it. 30 minutes later, bigger objects, according to his report, which is a 22-page document, he describes like a almost jellyfish object that stayed there. He observed it with his small telescope, and suddenly the objects flew away. and started falling this angel hair, what people later called angel hair. But it fell so much that all the schoolyard and the roads and above the ceilings, above the rooftops, there was this almost cotton-like substance.
Understand, because in reports of what we call angel hair, that was a much more common thing, it seems to me, in the 1950s and 60s. I don't hear a lot of it in recent times, but this is
there was, and I will get there. There was one as well.
Okay.
Recently, but it happened in Fatima as well in 1917,
okay.
and then in 1922, 57, 59, yeah, and then. The students were alerted not to touch the substance because they didn't know what it was. Mm-hmm. And this gentleman, Professor Joaquim Guedes do Amaral, he collected some samples. He went to the lab, tried to understand what it was, saw it on the microscope, and on the microscope he saw like this small being inside these filaments. It was a yellow egg on the center. It had tentacles which were vivid red. It moved, and it almost like raised its tentacles to avoid to being crushed by the.
Wait, so it was like a microscopic creature.
Microscopic creature, exactly. Yes. So he was astonished by this, seeing this creature, and he was friend of the father of Conceição e Silva, who was an admiral. He was a professor at the naval school near Lisbon. He is considered one of the fathers of amateur astronomy, because he had at his home, at his place, he had an observatory with a dome. Incredible.
Wow.
So the professor took the sample and went to visit the admiral. Later on in the day, so the admiral saw it, Conceição e Silva, the son, saw it. They tried to understand what it was. They couldn't reach any conclusion. So the admiral said, maybe you should deliver this to the Faculty of Sciences in Lisbon. So eventually some reports were done by botanics, from biologists, zoologists, and remember that back then in '59 there was still no DNA tests performed.
Right.
So they could not reach any conclusion. They say, but it's something that we never seen before. We cannot agree on what it could be, and the sample was stored at the faculty. A few years later, there was a big fire at the laboratory of the faculty, and the sample was lost.
So let me ask a question here. So when they would look at this substance through the microscope, right? It wasn't just one creature. I assume that there were lots of these little creatures?
No, there was one creature. On the sample that he picked up, there was this creature.
And it was
only reference to one creature. Okay.
It's only microscopically visible.
And remember that back then we were still under dictatorship, a very conservative society. Mm-hmm. And when you talk about beings coming from the sky, the academic establishment doesn't like that.
No,
so
right.
Yeah, everything was when Professor Joaquim Guedes do Amaral tried to get more answers, he was shut up. Completely. Okay. So moving forward, yes. In 2014, just after you were being here, mm-hmm. There was this someone contacted a member of Exopolitics Portugal, because he had seen some filaments falling from the sky and he could collect some samples. So eventually they sent it to me. I had them on my freezer, and these samples, 3 samples from different places, mm-hmm. and I got in touch with Joaquim Fernandes and the whole team from the university. We managed to get in touch with the Institute of Molecular Biology, where we were very well received there. They stored the sample at in one of the freezers at minus 81 degrees Celsius. And eventually we had to wait for free time from the postdoctorate students to be able to perform tests.
Okay.
Eventually, it was taking too much time, so we tried another approach, and we went to another facility from the University of Porto, which is a big new facility for research. They conducted some initial tests which were not conclusive, and they started asking money, of course. These tests cost some money, and
so their tests had what? No information?
I mean, it's a very long report that doesn't say much.
But this is another case of angel hair. In other words, of this very fine substance.
There was no being. Initially, when I got to the first sample, me and Raul Brengel, remember that guy that talked a lot? He has several degrees in different
talking
areas.
About our trip in Portugal, where we were sitting in a very small car driving through the streets, and there was a very, very intelligent and chatty and funny gentleman cracking jokes for much of the time, and that's who you're referring to.
Exactly. Yes. So he has he's a very intelligent guy. He has degrees in several areas.
Couldn't understand.
I imagine. He has a small lab in his house. So we performed a small microscopic observation with the first sample. He tried to check its reaction to different lasers with different wavelength, and it was interesting because with short wavelength it moved. That substance moved. It had like something.
It reacted under
reacted to the laser.
Wow.
But not much more, and we couldn't do much more than that. So the sample is still stored at the facility from the University of Porto. We eventually got money from a foundation, a research foundation, but we are still lacking some funds to do more. And there's plenty of more to do. We were presented with several types of different tests, but again, the machinery is very expensive, and we have to rely on the free time of the postdoctorate students. So
this may be something related to UFOs. It may not be. It may just be.
It may not be. One of the theories is that there must be some kind of not communities. Not communities. What's the name? Microorganisms in the upper layers of the atmosphere that may be disrupted when something crosses that area. So it may be a plane, maybe a UFO. We don't know, and it projects the substance down. So that's one of the theories.
Okay,
it could be Earth-linked, but from the upper layers.
It's interesting. Can I ask you? There's two other things that I would love to get in for this hour. One is if you would perhaps recount the story of General Conceição Silva about he discussed this. He had a colleague who had a cosmic top secret clearance himself, and this took place in the 1960s in Portuguese controlled Angola, I believe.
Yeah, because Angola was a colony, Portuguese colony, like Mozambique and Cape Verde and East Timor, etc. So back then, they were the colony wars. They wanted independence, and there was for example, I was born in Mozambique because my father was an official from the army and was stationed there. So I was born in the military hospital of Mozambique. But back then there was the suspicion that maybe the Soviets were delivering guns to the guerrilla and in the north part of Angola, because these ships would arrive in international waters like heavy, and then on the next day they would be like lifted, like they had emptied
exactly.
So there was suspicion that there could be some submarine activity in that area. So this Lieutenant Colonel Carlos Marques Pereira, his name. He was he was the captain of this anti-submarine plane, PV2, I guess it's the name of the plane, and he was ordered, or he had a mission to patrol that area of the sea, of the ocean, and when the Coast Guard would signal him to turn on the sonar in order to check any submarine activity. Okay, so free night sky. He went. It is just late afternoon. He went like 20 miles offshore. Lights off, radio off. Just
right.
waiting for
they're looking for evidence of Soviet deliveries of weapons to
any type of activity, underwater activity.
So they're being ultra quiet.
Ultra quiet. Yes. Yep. Yes. So waiting for the Navy patrol to give the clearance to turn on the sonar. And so suddenly they saw this is a 9 crew plane. They saw two lights, one reddish, one bluish, and one yellowish, up to land. They were behaving like two butterflies. He asked by radar to the tower if there was any type of activity. They said no. He contacted the major tower in Luanda, which is the capital of Angola, to check for any traffic. No traffic. So they kept there. Suddenly, the order to turn on the sonar, and this is the big sonar with capacity of 600 miles to detect any movement. So it's powerful, very powerful. So the minute that he turned on the sonar, the two objects came directly to the plane, and he thought he was afraid that there was a collision. So he made a maneuver, an emergency maneuver, and one of the objects stood just in front of the nose, like doing this. Okay, it enlightened all the inside of the plane. All the crew members saw it, of course. He said it was clearly intelligent. It was like checking us out, who we were.
I just want to stop you for a moment, because as I understand it, when they originally saw those lights were many miles away.
Many miles away, inland. And it immediately went to the plane, and it stood there for a couple of seconds, and then it went away again. So it saw that it was not a threat to him, maybe. So
it traveled many miles, like immediately.
Yes, immediately. Yeah. So eventually, the mission took place. They arrived at the base. They were ordered to do a report because there were communications to understand what it was. And because back then there was a bit of a fight between the Navy and the Air Force, and this man wanted to go to the Air Force. He didn't want to make too much noise, so he said each member of the plane will make his own reports, not so many details, and just present it like that. The other day, he was asked to be at the commander's base and to explain the reports. And so he explained it, okay. Another 2 days, he was again asked for the base commander. There, when he arrived, there were several officers, high patent officers, generals, smiling at him. and they asked him to pick up a document that was on top of the table, and that document was from the governor of Cabinda. And Cabinda is a small area up north Angola, and the governor had been in that precise day where he had the sighting, had been for a night hunt with some colleagues on the savannah, and he saw some objects with the same details that he saw in the airplane.
Location. In the same location.
Not in the same location, up north. I mean, he was in the night hunt. Okay, so this object came and just landed. So they were very, very frightened. They went to the hideout and stayed in the hideout until dawn because they were afraid of the object. So that was a confirmation. Mm-hmm. So he felt less bad, but he never heard anything about it anymore, and he never had any other UFO case in his life.
Thanks for explaining that. To me personally, I'd had some of those details wrong. I remembered that there was an on-the-ground confirmation of that, and I guess I just thought it was in the exact same location.
No, this was up north Angola. It was another location. Apparently the same objects went there and landed there. Okay? The description was more or less the same.
No, it's a fascinating story. Again, we just have to ask ourselves what is able to do the things that this object was witnessed to do by a number of people, well-qualified people with good technical instrumentation as well. It's really mystifying. And you have people like the Chief of Staff of the Portuguese Air Force, who was a very strong believer in this. You wouldn't really have an easy time finding American chiefs of staff openly talking about this type of thing. I can confidently say that. Maybe they talk about it privately, but they're not talking about it to UFO researchers for sure. So,
indeed. And I could tell you about this other case in '82. This one, just after the protocol agreement with the Air Force that allowed civilian researchers to go to the bases and talk to the pilots just after the event. Okay. So there was a very thorough investigation with psychological evaluation, measures, etc. It was absolutely fantastic. Leslie Kane also talked about this case. And one of the pilots, there were 3 pilots involved. One of them stayed silent since then, never talked to anyone. The other 2, one of them is still active, an active airline pilot, and the other one just retired. He's a good friend of mine, Julio Guerra, very tough, but he doesn't have any problems in talking about it. He enjoys talking about it. And he asked why there's no more confirmation about this in the media.
So what happened in 1982?
Well, in 1982, this pilot Julio Guerra was also performing a training flight, 6,000 feet with a Chipmunk, which is a very it's a training plane. So very simplistic, no major instruments. Okay. And suddenly he saw what he thought was the light of a cockpit flying just near the ground. So we contacted the tower in order to check for confirmation for traffic. The tower said no traffic. So he tried to position himself above the other object, and suddenly the object just did this and stayed in front of his airplane, and then suddenly tried to do this. And so the pilot tried also to keep him always on sight, performing high maneuvers and tight curves, flying. He contacted the radar saying, I have something that I cannot identify. It's like a small ball of light. And the other colleagues of him, the other pilots that were flying in nearby areas, tried joking with him. You're drunk, you're seeing football, etc. Mm-hmm. And eventually he kept trying to understand what that thing was. So later, 10 minutes later, he contacted the tower again, saying, I have this still on site. Well, the radar couldn't do anything. And so some colleagues of him decided to go and meet him. And so at a long distance, they saw his plane going around with a ball of light circling him already also. So these two pilots, they were both in one plane. They did this. So tried to do a 180 degrees separation, and the object, when the object flew between the two airplanes, they could take a look, and not only about the shape, but only about the size of that object. It was like a disc, metallic, bright metallic on top, reddish on the bottom, with small lights flashing on its equator, and about 3 meters wide. Small. Okay. And the object kept going, and suddenly the pilot Julio Guerra said, I want to know what this is, and I'm going off gasoline, so I must know what this is. And he tried to intercept the object. He calculated where the object came and tried to intercept it, and the object came, like made a aerodynamic maneuver, stop, and flew above his airplane and went away. Impressive. Yeah.
Very impressive.
He thought, I'm going to crash with him. He took his hands on, but when they landed, well, they were interviewed, and this team of researchers, José Sotomayor was the first one to go there, and we have pictures of him, etc., interviewing the pilots, the very thorough investigation. They couldn't reach any conclusion, but 1 year after, it was allowed, with the permission of the José Lemos Ferreira, the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. There was a meeting here in Porto with the pilots and a group of almost 40 scientists from local universities that wanted to debate this phenomena and what to do next. And then one of the propositions that took place was deliver coordinated with the Ministry of Internal Affairs, distributed these questionnaires among all the police station and National Guard stations across the country, so that anyone that may have a sighting could go there and report it, and then it would be sent to the ministry, and then to the ministry to the university. We still have some of them from 2001 or something like that.
So there were a number of reports that people made in subsequent years for a while.
Yes,
That's no longer active anymore? That doesn't...
No, there was no, because the hierarchy changed. Different people came, so maybe it's,
Right. Yeah. So Francisco, you coordinate Exopolitics Portugal, and you're very active in the Portuguese UFO research community. It seems like you know everybody, and you're very involved in that. So I have a couple of questions. We have maybe 5 minutes before we have to end this segment. But what's the dominant opinion about the researchers in your country about UFOs? Do they think it's extraterrestrial, or do they think there are other explanations? And then the other thing I just want to ask you is, are there big issues or problems that Portugal's exopolitics or UFO community are dealing with these days, or issues?
Issues, several. Well, yeah. First question. Yes, I know many of the researchers here in Portugal, if not all of them. Maybe we have different opinions, different approaches, but I try to get along with everyone, because I think that's it's a good idea to have this communication flowing and not so much of an ego fighting. And I think if we all work together, it's better. But we have different opinions. Even inside the university, among the researchers, there are different opinions, sometimes exacerbated, sometimes, yes, but it is what it is. And yes, there's this sense that it could be extraterrestrial, but I mean, we are not we don't agree that we are like a zoo or a touristic attraction or some kind of workplace where every day there's UFO sightings. I mean, there are everyday UFO reports, but I don't believe that all of them are, not even half of them are extraterrestrial or whatever.
Right.
Regarding issues, regarding it's complicated. It's a word with lots of how can I say, very well bad seen by the general public, or at least among the UFO believers or researchers, mainly because some of the fathers of exopolitics decided to go with a more speculative approach, giving credit to stories like Corey Goods and stuff like that. That's we feel it's not credible. If you have, like, it's a saying that has been on the table since forever. If you have extraordinary claims, you have to have extraordinary evidence. And in the case of Corey Good, there's total lack of evidence. So
this has caused a rift within Portugal's exopolitics community as well, you're saying?
No, among the exopolitics groups across the globe, yes. Some of them, for a fact, most of us are part of the advisory board of the Exopolitics Institute, and we have problems with having the president of the institute, Michael Sala, giving credit to Corey Good, for example. In the same way, like Alfred Weber was giving credit to Andrew Bagiago. It's exactly the same. It's lack of evidence. So we cannot promote that on...
This is a major fault line. Maybe it's the major fault line.
We try to make a difference. We have GLEXO, which is Global Exopolitics Organization, and several people that belong to the advisory board of the Exopolitics Institute. Now we try to gather via Skype. We have every 15 days, at least once a month, we have conversations, debates, and try to understand what to do better. What can we do better? We have, at least in Portugal, and I believe even Robert Fleischer in Germany, we have invested too much in our group in order to just change the name, just because we still believe on the principles of exopolitics. Exopolitics right now has been infiltrated by people that are not credible, but that just gives us more drive to promote another view of exopolitics.
There's a cult-like atmosphere with a lot of this, and anyone who's followed the UFO exopolitics field can see it. When you have it, the UFO subject by its inherently is an extraordinary thing, and skeptics sitting on the outside already have a difficult time with it. But responsible UFO research, as you well know, knows that it's incumbent to provide evidence for those claims, and good ufology has been able to do that for many, many years. And the problem that you're seeing in Europe and we see everywhere is not only extraordinary claims, but provided by trust me. It's just trust me. Trust me, and there's no evidence. It's not that you or I or anyone else would automatically say that's wrong, that's impossible. I wouldn't say that, but these people have got to help us a little bit. They've got to provide us with information. You can't just throw out a claim and then expect people with zero evidence to say, oh yes, it's obviously true. And that's what's happened.
I mean, I understand from the standpoint of people that enjoy too much ufology, that they want to know more. And ufology keeps analyzing lights in the sky. These people want to know more. And when someone arrives and with a big story that there's secret space program with blue avians, etc., they drive there, they go there because they feel that there's more information, new information that they could eventually fill the void that they have because ufology has not evolved since the 40s.
Yeah, I think part of it is, in olden times before internet, the UFO field was basically dominated by a couple of journals that practically no one read. Circulation of a couple of thousand at the most, and researchers could more or less talk amongst themselves about cases that they were actually researching. Then comes the internet, then comes YouTube, and suddenly the entire world can participate. And I think a lot of UFO researchers were a bit shocked by how standards just went away. No standards necessary, because suddenly hundreds of thousands and millions of people could latch on to stories that they thought were really cool stories with no evidence.
And for the good and for the better, because there's too much information. There's lots of good information, but there's lots of noise. Lots of noise that
Totally.
just blows everything. It's. I mean, even for example, some researchers sometimes they attack other researchers because they are always talking about the old cases, but the old cases are not contaminated by the current noise of YouTube and etc. So even, you have apps on the cell phone that you can add UFOs or etc. So there's too much noise, and so the old cases are the better ones because there were no drones back then, there was no digital photography back then, so there are more credible cases, of course.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. The history of this is so important, and we are really at great risk. If we discard that history, we're really weakening. Those of us who believe that the UFO phenomenon is important, we weaken our own cause by throwing that history out, as you well know. I'm glad to hear you say that.
Yeah.
I think we've run out of time for this segment, my friend. Would you stick around with me for a follow-up interview on Fatima?
Of course.
I would love to. Well, I would just say thanks. This concludes this segment of my wonderful interview with Francisco Correa Mourao. I think I got your... I am so bad with Portuguese
Francisco Mourao Correa. Yeah.
Thank you.
No, it was so nice to talk with you.
I like to butcher it. I'm the Anglo butcher of the Portuguese language. Anyway, I've really enjoyed this, and if you want to hear us continue our conversation, go to Richard Dolan Members, where we're going to talk about Fatima, and probably not simply the most famous Portuguese case, but one of the most famous, I guess we could say, inexplicable events of the 20th century. I'd say Fatima's maybe the top one, or one of the very top ones. So thanks for listening, and remember, while we learn and grow and search for the truth, let's be good to each other. Later.